Let me welcome everyone to today's session, which looks at Iran-China relations and tries to separate the fact from the fiction. We have two people who will be speaking from our institute, Dr. Asif Shuja, who's a senior research fellow and is an expert on Iran, and Dr. James Dorsey, who is primarily with the S. Rajaratnam School, but we've been able to sort of entice him over as well as an adjunct with us. And he, in his last life, he was a journalist, in his current life, he is a prolific commentator. Those of you who know his writings would probably know that he writes a great deal about soccer in the Middle East. It's not simply about soccer, it's much more subtle than that. Asif comes from a background of having worked at a number of research institutes in India before he came to Singapore. He speaks Persian, always intrigues us with interesting stories of his why he became interested in Iran, and provides for rather lively conversations when we all get together as a group. Let me talk a little bit about today's topic. Most of you would know that in recent months, an apparent 25-year economic and military cooperation agreement between Iran and China was leaked. And there's been an intense debate. Is this part of an ongoing game, or was this an inadvertent leak or a leak from someone that ought not to have leaked it? How do we interpret or read this issue? And this is where we talk about separating the facts from the fiction. There are largely two camps that have emerged, and you will see this in today's discussion and debate. One school of thought takes this reported draft at face value and looks at what it could mean for the Middle East as a region, as well as for individual Middle Eastern countries. The other school sees this leaking of the draft as a tactic employed by Iran and China to advance their separate objectives. The jury is out on this. I myself am not sure how I feel about this issue and what it all really means. This is how we will proceed for the session. Asif will start. He will make a few comments, and then James will follow. And we will not have a Q&A in the traditional way. I expect that Asif and James are going to have a bit of a debate because they've already been talking about this, and they each have a different perspective on this issue. So once they've said what they have to say, I expect that each might challenge the other on some of the ideas that they have put forward. We welcome the audience to raise your hand and identify yourself, and you're welcome to comment, ask a question of one of the speakers, and contribute to the discussion. We will not be taking Q&A on the chat, so I would ask you all that if you do have a question to raise your hand, and we will unmute you so that you can ask your question or you can make your comment. Okay, so let's start. Asif, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Michelle, for that introduction and set the ball rolling. Since we are about to talk about Iran-China relations and the exact nature of it, first of all, I would just like to throw the fact on the ground. And the most recent, United Nations Security Council sanction that happened, in that China, along with Russia, vetoed against the proposal. That was for the continuation of arms embargo on Iran. So we know that if the armaments are increased in Iran, Saudi Arabia being one of the biggest, biggest stakeholders in the threats emanating from Iran. So it was not good for Saudi Arabia. So despite that, Iran vetoed that resolution. The people are generally talking about whether China is siding with Iran or not. It is for all of us to see there that China has indeed sided with Iran on this issue. And after the attack on Saudi Arabia, where more than 50% of its oil produce was affected, the threat emanating from Iran or its proxies is even more for Saudi Arabia. So we can understand the threat that is being felt by Saudi Arabia at this point of time, and why it was very important for Saudi Arabia to continue that arms embargo against Iran. So again, I would reiterate that this one single incident shows us very clearly the nature of Iran-China relationship, at least at the present moment. So this is for all of us to see. But our eyes are generally innocent. They see what is there. But it is our brain that functions in a manner which compels us to either see or to not to see that particular thing. So what I would intend here is to just give a three-dimensional picture of Iran-China relationship very briefly, and I will leave it for others to see whether this is actually in existence or not. The first, of course, is related to this 18-page document that is being circulated as some kind of secret document purportedly leaked by Iran. This 18-page document, very briefly, what exactly is inside that document? There are a number of figures floating on the internet, like $280 billion related to oil investment, energy investment, and $120 billion in the investment in infrastructure sector. These figures are not there in the document. So this is one anomaly that I find in most of the writings that are circulated. These figures in that Persian document is not there. Now, there is also a lot of talk that there is a lot of sovereignty that may be ceded after this deal that is going to be there within Iran and China. All those things are also not there. But of course, what is there is related to a deep strategic relationship between Iran and China, and that is in a descriptive nature, and that is somewhat in an enlarged, enhanced form of the memorandum of understanding between Iran and China. That is available there on the website of Iran's President Dr. Rouhani. And that was actually the result of the two visits immediately after the nuclear deal. The first visit was the Xi Jinping's visit to Iran, and vice versa. Iran's president visited China. So this is actually the product of that. Then there are a number of other figures that are floating around, more precisely about 5,000 soldiers being positioned on the territory of Iran to secure the investment of Iran. Where does this figure come from? This figure has actually come from an article published on 3rd of September 2019 by Petroleum Economist. The article, which was written by Mr. Watkins, who is not an Iranian. Now, this Petroleum Economist, it is, if you go for the ownership of that journal, online journal, you see that the ownership lies with an investment businessman sitting in Texas, in United States. And in 2019, 3rd of September, the beans that were spilled, that this depth of partnership is being, falls between these two powers. It was on that day, and even 5,000. So this is the first dimension of it. That is the 18-page document. The second dimension, incidentally, is again related to number 18, and that is the lifting of arms embargo that is about to happen on 18th of October next month. So a lot of politics that is doing the round related to Iran's international relations, and whether Iran is forging such relationship with China or not, or why it is hiding against the backdrop of its relationship with, or enmity with, current enmity, especially after the COVID-19 against the United States. So all those are related to the 18th of October lifting of arms embargo. So that is related to or linked to Iran's international relations. And then the third dimension, again, coincidentally, is linked with 18th, the number 18, and that is 18th of June 2021, when when in Iran, the presidential election is about to happen. So on that territory, on that turf or the domestic politics of Iran, there are the challenges of Rouhani government. And if you remember that the most proponent, the most explicit proponent of this idea that there's a secret deal, Iran is being sold out to the China, was Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And he was for 2 consecutive terms president of Iran, but subsequently he was barred from contesting by the supreme leader of Iran, but he did challenge his authority and did file his nomination and again was rejected. So this is the position of Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. And now this time again he has been eyeing for that position. And all of us know that the position of president, especially under this scenario where we see that there could be succession of Ayatollah Khamenei, supreme leader. So he may as well be eyeing that position. So it is very important for Ahmadinejad to discredit the present government and the entire camp of reformists or the moderates combined. So that is why he did not directly allude to this 18-page document, but a lot of what was enshrined there, he did indirectly allude without giving those figures or numbers. So this was pulled in the turf of the domestic politics of Iran, and that is why they also started talking about this secret document, and the observers started taking up as if it is something which was actually leaked by the Iranian government, whereas the fact of the matter is that we do not know for sure that it was a document written by Iranian government or whether it was deliberately leaked by them. So what I have intended to do here is to draw a 3-dimensional picture in these 3 terms: the document itself, the international relations and the geopolitics of the current era, and third, of course, the domestic politics of Iran. So under the garb of this, we can see that this is the picture of Iran-China relationship that is being projected. And just very briefly, sorry to take so much of time, I will tell you what exactly is the real nature of Iran-China relationship. We can understand that by looking into the different phases of Iran-China relationship. Before the sanctions started in 2006, after the sanctions started in the 4 sets of United Nations sanctions that were imposed between 2006 and 2010. After 2010, when the nuclear negotiations were going on in 2015, it was forced. And from 2015 to 2018, when the sanctions were imposed by United States, and after that, until the current time, where the enmity is very, very prominent, very, very evident between between China and United States relations. So if you look at all these phases of Iran-China relationship, you will see that, and of course, because China is the greatest trading partner of Iran, but China's only 1% trade is done with Iran. That is why we say that Iran has been talking so much about this partnership. China has been muted because for China it is, theoretically speaking, one of 100 countries. For China it is the topmost. For Iran it is the topmost country. So this is why the confusion that we see emanating from all the writings on the commentaries on Iran-China relationship. This in brief is my contention on this floor, and I would stop here and look forward to the counter comment. Thank you.
Thank you. That was interesting. James?
Thank you, Michelle. Before I go into the thrust of my argument, I want to respond to 2 things that Asif said. What I agree with Asif is that in the publicity and the discussion about this document, there is much being read into it that's not in the document. And it's both for, indeed, domestic Iranian reasons, as well as foreign reasons. And there's a degree of disinformation going on here, very deliberately. What I don't agree with is that reading the Chinese vote in the UN Security Council on the arms embargo issue, that was taking sides with Iran. I think it was China having far bigger fish to fry than the Middle East itself. And China was not going to allow the United States to sort of at will decide what parts of an agreement that it had discarded it could implement and could not implement, and how it deals with the international world order and the rules governing it. So I think that it was very clear that that's why China, just like the Europeans and everybody else on the UN Security Council, with the exception of the Dominican Republic, voted against the US. What I don't think it was a clear indication that Chinese policy had changed and that China was siding with Iran. And the Saudis may not have been happy with the Chinese vote, but they knew it was coming and they didn't say anything about it for that reason. Now, more fundamentally, what I would argue, and that's where we get into the what Michelle argued or suggested at the beginning, the school of thought that this may be all an intelligence operation. I think what the draft does do in the text that it is, it's in line with our times. It's really about the politics of fear and the politics of transition in the Middle East. And I would argue that China was likely taken as much by surprise by the leaked draft as was much of the rest of the world, but was more than happy to cautiously exploit it for its own purposes without upsetting the apple cart. I think in dissecting the alleged draft agreement, you've got to start with common sense. And the fact of the matter is, it makes no sense. Leave aside what we've already discarded, the notion that Iran would be willing to concede territory to a foreign power. Fact of the matter is, the numbers are out of whack. Nowhere along the Belt and Road has China committed anything close to $400 billion. Its single largest country investment was supposed to be in Pakistan at $62 billion. And 5 years after the launch of that investment with the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, CPEC, actual Chinese investment is far less. It's about $25 billion. Finally, China has for the longest period of time sought to walk a fine line and not be drawn into the Middle East's myriad of conflicts. It will continue to do so, even if it engages to a greater extent than it has until now. An agreement along the lines of the draft would amount to an abandoning of that policy and be perceived as China having chosen sides against the Gulf states. I can see no reason why China would want to deepen its relations with Iran in this way, at least not until a degree of stability in the Middle East has been achieved. There is also no reason why China would want to further aggravate relations with the United States and make it easier for the US to pressure Israel and the Gulf states to limit their dealings with China, particularly on the eve of a crucial US election. In other words, what we are seeing unfold is not a head-on rush into paradigm-shifting alliances, but a complex longer-term game, a combination of chess and poker that transcends the upcoming US election, but takes it as a first milestone. It's jockeying for positions in what inevitably is a changing Middle Eastern landscape. It's all about messaging, and that is as true for Iran as it is for China. It also, in anticipation of hopes that a possible Biden administration would seek a way of backing away from Trump's so far failed maximum pressure campaign against Iran and reviving in negotiations with Tehran. It further anticipates an eventual rejiggering of the Middle East security architecture in ways that include Iran and would involve not just the United States, but also China, as well as Russia and possibly India. Although not explicitly stated, it would likely also have to include Turkey and Israel. Returning to negotiations is likely to prove easier said than done. Iran has made clear that a revival of negotiations would not occur by the stroke of a pen. It is demanding that the United States, which unilaterally withdrew in 2018 from the 2015 international agreement that curbed Iran's nuclear programs, return to the deal unconditionally and compensated for billions of dollars in economic damage inflicted with the imposition of harsh sanctions at the time of the withdrawal. It will take deft mediation by third parties to get the two countries back to the negotiating table. Similarly, a Biden administration, while likely to enjoy a degree of goodwill after 4 years of Trump, would have to restore US credibility with the co-signatories of the Iran deal, the European Union, Germany, Russia, and China. Yet the messaging is also important if Trump were to win a second term. Despite his hard line, Trump has repeatedly signaled that he believes that a deal with Iran is possible. and would be willing to meet with Iranian leaders. That could take on added significance in a second Trump administration that is likely to be far more concerned about legacy, given that re-election would no longer be an option. Against that backdrop, Iran's messaging is carefully tailored. The draft agreement outlining a kind of alliance with China that would be virtually unprecedented serves to warn the United States and Europe that US policy and failed European efforts to make the nuclear deal worth Iran's while, despite the US sanctions, is driving Iran into the hands of China at a time of a potential decoupling of the world's two largest economies. It also serves to poke a finger at Saudi Arabia, suggesting that Chinese-Iranian negotiations about the agreement prove that when the chips are down, Iran is far more important than the kingdom in long-term Chinese strategic thinking and economic calculations. It's an argument that serves Chinese interests that in recent months have been playing its own game of bluff poker and has some basis in subtle Chinese hints in recent months and years. At the root of Iranian and Chinese shadowboxing is a realization that the current US defense umbrella in the Gulf that is intended to shield Gulf states from Iranian aggression and terrorist attacks is no longer a reliable mechanism, and in fact could heighten rather than reduce tensions. Various parties buy into this notion in various ways. Iran has long said that it seeks a regional security arrangement, but in contrast to a Russian proposal and subtle Chinese suggestions that would involve external powers, Iran wants an understanding that does not involve countries from outside the region. The US has not publicly expressed interest in a multilateral security agreement, but has repeatedly said it wished to reduce its commitment to the region. Privately, however, Pentagon and National Security Council officials have discussed the option and not ruled it out, noting that a non-aggression agreement in the Gulf has worked in the past. As always, the devil is in the details, with Iran, Israel, and Saudi Arabia being sticking points. All the fish that the Gulf states and the US have to fry with Iran and vice versa, nuclear programs in Iran and Saudi Arabia, ballistic missile developments in both states, and support for proxies would have to factor into a non-aggression agreement. In other words, there is a close link between reducing tension in the Middle East and any future US nuclear negotiations with Iran. And that is not to mention that regional states, not just Iran, may push for denuclearization of the region, which would have to include Israel. It's hard to see Iran entering into a non-aggression pact that would include Israel without a mutually acceptable resolution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and without a nuclear agreement and the lifting of all sanctions against Iran. For now, smaller Gulf states appear amenable to a subtle Chinese push for a multilateral security agreement, with only Saudi Arabia having given it a cold shoulder so far. China's response to the draft agreement has been as much a signaling that it has no substance. As of now, even if Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif said in recent days that he would be traveling to Beijing to discuss the document. China's response was twofold: an official foreign ministry statement praising relations with Iran in platitudes and generalities, and a semi-official op-ed in a second-tier Shanghai Communist Party newspaper written by a second-tier academic. The op-ed noted that much had yet to be negotiated and planned, and that the two countries were nowhere close to finalizing details. It also cautioned that the degree to which China would engage with Iran was a function of US-China relations. The more Beijing and Washington grow apart, the freer China will feel in its dealings with Iran. It's a message that no doubt has been heard in Tehran. The bottom line of all of this is that we are witnessing jockeying, shadowboxing, a game of poker, whatever you want to call it, as states position themselves for an inevitable rejiggering of the Middle East security architecture. Driving the transition is uncertainty in Gulf states, as well as in China, about the US regional security guarantee. Hedging bets means for Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia, as well as China, greater engagement. The issue is on what terms. China is signaling its terms: conflict management rather than conflict resolution. A non-aggression agreement between Iran, Saudi Arabia is a precondition. China will not risk that greater goal, as well as its carefully crafted relations with all parties on all sides of Middle Eastern divides, by engaging with Iran in a way that is envisioned in the draft agreement. It would be throwing the baby with the bathtub out of the window. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Asif, would you like to respond?
Of course, I would like to respond. Because Michelle, it's very interesting what James has been doing here. He has said that there is a draft, there is some content in that draft, and which is not happening. It was leaked by Iran, it is being sold out by Iran, and that selling is also accepted by China because it is also benefiting China. This is what he's essentially been saying. So, of course, we don't know whether Iran leaked this document, but we do know the details of it, right? And so what we can do here is that we can focus on whether it is the whole mechanism that James has been claiming, whether it has been having intended effect or not, whether it is benefiting Iran or not. So my argument here is that that first of all we have to decouple. When he says Iran has sent this message, what does he mean by saying that Iran? Because we know that when we talk about Iran, we might say that it is Supreme Leader who's been saying that. We might as well say that it is the President Rouhani's government who has been doing certain things. In my opinion, this leaking of purportedly leaked draft, I do not maintain it was a draft leaked by the Iranian government. So, but it is 18-page draft. It has not benefited Iran's Supreme Leader. It has not benefited Iran's Rouhani government. More specifically, Rouhani's foreign minister Javad Zarif had to face a lot of heat in the conservative-led Iranian parliament because of this draft. And there's a lot of stake because the way it is being sold out by his opponent, primarily led by Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and his conservative camp, it is again damaged a great deal to the Rouhani government and the people's or the forces supporting him. Does it help Rouhani? It doesn't help Rouhani. I'll tell you why. Because we have been talking about United Nations Security Council sanctions, which which China has been saying that I will not reimpose. So what was China's position? How was it imposed in the first place? It was because China did not veto it. All the 4 set of United Nations Security Council were imposed by Iran, sorry, by the United Nations on Iran, because China in the first place did not oppose it. So it did have the power that these sanctions would not have been imposed in the first place. But that was the geopolitics of that time. That was how China was getting benefited at that time, and that is why it did not veto. Now it is seeing a different ballgame altogether. I'll tell you what it is. In 2017, first of all, it is not only our perception that China and United States are having some enmity. After coming to power in the United States, Donald Trump, the President Donald Trump, came out with a national security strategy document where he projected Iran as one of the biggest threats to United States, of course, along with Russia. Then 2018, the State Department came out with a similar kind of document, and where also China was projected as that kind of enemy to the United States interest. We know that after the shale gas revolution in the United States, what is the US interest in the Middle East? It's not primarily energy. And do you know that when US was primarily dependent on the region for energy, what was its policy to the Middle East? The #1 focus of attention. Now China is a great power. China requires energy in a similar fashion as the United States required at that point of time, but does not do it now. So can't we draw a parallel that China's requirement from the Middle East would be of the similar nature which United States had at one point of time. So why would we imply that China would be siding with Iran in such a manner that it would have enmity with all the other players, including Saudi Arabia? I think it is not wise for the people who have been following Sun Tzu and whose primary motto is that if there is a cross section of interest, one of the 9 battlefields, then you must have alliance with those interest holders. This is Sun Tzu's technique. So this is what we are saying. China is having a great deep partnership, not as propounded by the purportedly leaked document, but yes, it is a very deep strategic partnership that it has been forging with Iran, which is much deeper in degree than Saudi Arabia and other states. And I'll tell you, just for the benefit of our audience, that China does have similar kind of strategic partnership with Saudi Arabia. China has a similar strategic partnership with, similar means the nature of partnership, not the depth, with United Arab Emirates. In recent years, China has, and this is a military cooperation, China has had twice joint military cooperation with Iran and twice in consonance jointly with Russia and Iran. So there are 4 military cooperations, 2 with Russia and Iran and 2 solely with Iran. China did have this kind of military cooperation once with Saudi Arabia. It has done this kind of military cooperation in good times with the United States. But what I am implying here is that China is not burning all the bridges, burning all the boats. But when you take it in a comparative manner, China does have, and specifically at this point of time, very deep partnership, or it is looking for a potential deep partnership with Iran because of these reasons. Why doesn't it come up? See, there's a website, if you have a look at it, United Against Nuclear Iran. It has a great detail of all the businesses that is happening, very, very small details. So there are some websites, there are some stakeholders who have been documenting all the transactions that are happening so that serve as a basis for the sanctions of United States to be imposed on those countries or those entities or those people. So it's just one example that I am giving. Why would China come out all in the open? There's another argument I'll give you that, and it is not an official one, it's my understanding that even the data between Iran and China relationship is not collated at one place. The way New York Times says that, okay, some high profile people revealed, or even in Petroleum Economist, if you go and read it, you know, this $400 billion figure in 2 parts, 280 and 120, it is not in the document. It is in that Watkins article. And he has said that it was revealed by a high official. My argument is, no high official except the supreme leader knows the exact figure between the the trade between China and this Iran, because it has been dissipated, so that it is not leaked in any manner, you know, because if it happens, you know the implication. It is not that anybody is afraid of United States as a military power. Like China is not afraid because of its military, but China has to do business with United States. It's not only China as an entity which is doing business with United States. Let us also qualify it. It is a set of private companies residing in China which are doing business with the set of companies in the United States which are legally established there through some laws which are guided by the US government. So that is why I would say again, come back here that James, what he's been doing, that he's saying that there's a document which is propagated by Iran, and then he's saying that it is playing a game, and then he himself claiming that this game Iran will not win. So I simply do not understand how to look at it. But I would again argue that please have a look at the real nature of Iran-China relationship. Let us save some of our time in dissipating or marginalizing all those unnecessary figures which are floating around on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you, James. I'm sure you have something to say.
Let me look at points of. Let me make one correction first, and then look at points of agreement and points of disagreement. I didn't say that Iran was winning this. This is not about winning. It's about messaging. It's about pre-positioning in what is going to be a longer process. It's not about winning this round or not. I don't think that's the case. That's one. Two, I would agree with Asif that this has had a domestic fallout. And in some ways, I don't think it's really relevant, or not, it's not totally irrelevant, but it's not necessarily the key issue who leaked the document. For all we know, it could have been someone on the hard line in Iran. Fact of the matter is, Iran has basically tried to confirm the document and has not denied it, even though it's become something of a hot potato in Iranian politics. The second point I want to make is on the veto. I don't think there's a comparison between this veto and past vetoes. This veto is about the United States. It's not about Iran, as far as China was concerned, or Russia, or Germany, or Britain, or France. It was about a presidency that runs roughshod over international agreements. And I think this was a moment where to say no. In addition to all the other signatories to the Iran agreement wanting to somehow salvage it as if at all possible and keep the door open if a Biden administration comes to office. I think more fundamentally, and this is, I think, where the crux of the matter lies. The crux of the matter is a much larger picture in my mind. It's a picture in which China is starting to realize that in a purely economically driven engagement in the Middle East, in which security is no longer reliably guaranteed, is not sustainable. And therefore, what China has been doing, and it's been doing that indirectly, if you wish, using intellectuals, think tank people, academics, it's been hinting that there has to be a rethink. And it's been trying to exploit the fact that Gulf states have a problem. Like China, they have to hedge their bets. They're incapable of defending themselves, and they don't have no longer have a reliable defense architecture or security architecture in place. That's the big picture. And so you've got to ask yourself, why now, when what you're really trying to achieve is far more difficult, far more complex, and you don't want to ruffle feathers at that moment. You know, whether this would break relations, not break relations, it's without question would ruffle feathers. And I think that that is a very different picture from the argument why China voted in the United Nations recently on the lifting of the arms embargo.
Okay. I've noticed that a couple of people have turned on their cameras. Are you wanting to contribute to the discussion? If you are, could you please raise your hand in the chat? Sorry, so that we can unmute you. No? Okay. Miss Mitra Ranajat, did you want to say something? Yes, okay, we have to unmute you. Hang on a second. There you are. Could you introduce yourself as well? And then just let us know who you're addressing your question to or your comment.
Sure, madam. Hello, everybody. Thanks to invite me. I'm Mitra Rahnejad, professor of Allame Tabatabai University in Tehran. I'm so happy to enjoy you and this seminar. I hope can enjoy more about this subject. Actually, I'm interested in China relationship with West country in Asia, and I hope to learn more about this relation.
Okay. I think we won't be addressing that in today's session, but if we do have one of those events, we certainly will make sure that you are invited to the event. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, Tilak, you have a question?
Got it. I just unmuted myself. Thank you very much to both speakers. One comment and one question. The short comment is on, I believe Asif was referring to Simon Watkins of the Petroleum Economist. Now, generally, the Petroleum Economist is not noted in the Middle East circles as having extremely good intelligence or security assessments. But again, that's roughly the kind of judgments that I've come across with colleagues in the Middle East. And just one more thing on Watkins, he wrote a piece on precisely the agreements that both of you guys have been talking about, and it was, I believe, quite way over the top. And when our guest from Israel was asked, I forget his name, he found it complete hyperbole. So perhaps we need to be a bit more careful about the 5,000 Chinese soldiers in Iran and so on. I would look at Middle East Economic Survey, MEES or Stratfor, as better position within the region for assessments on strategy and security. My question, it relates to the broader picture that James brought up, which is multilateral security and so on. And I'm interested in both your points of view with respect to just how much have the Abraham Accords changed the regional security picture. To one reading, it is that it is a dramatic change. It's brought Israel front and center into the heart of domestic security within the GCC. It has also hedged UAE and the moderate Sunni countries in the GCC, their dependence on the US with direct relationships with Israel. So maybe your views on that would be very interesting. Thank you.
This is probably the only time in this session that I'm going to try and speak for Asif. I think both of us discarded the notions of whatever sums were mentioned, as well as the notions of ceding of territory or the stationing of foreign troops on Iranian soil. I think that anybody who even vaguely knows Iran knows that that's beyond the pale. And I would also, by and large, agree with you, and many do, Tilak, on your assessment of the petroleum intelligence. On the broader question, what I think that basically what the agreement has done between the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Israel, it has put on the table what already existed. Israel was already involved in domestic security in the Gulf. There were very close security relations. But what it has done is two things in that regard. One is, by the fact that it's no longer covert or sort of just below the surface, it's now open, it's official. There are a lot of things you can do openly. And that's, I think, one importance of it. So as you are, and I think you've also got to realize there are, as we talk about transition in security architecture in the Gulf, various countries have various concerns with other of the possible participants. So we've talked mostly about the United States and reduced reliability, which is something that's shared. And so what you're seeing is regional countries forging alliances to somehow compensate and hedge your bets because of that unreliability. But I think that the problem that you have here, it doesn't solve anything. Now, the other thing I wanted to say, that's why I said different countries have different issues. China and Israel differ fundamentally, as they do, by the way, on the Gulf states, on the Palestinian issue. There are other issues that they disagree on. So there are all kinds of concerns that play into it. What I think is the key here is that you're only going to get you're not going to get stability by essentially institutionalizing a divisive situation that you already have. You're going to get stability if you can come to an architecture in which everybody is involved and agrees and understands the rules of the game. And that's, I think, what the Chinese and the Russians are trying to do, and how the Chinese, particularly Chinese, much more than the Russians, want to hedge their bets, because they understand this is not going to be sustainable. Something has to change, but they indeed do not want to get involved in the messiness of all of these disputes and conflicts. And that's why I said earlier that the Chinese policy at this point is trying to find or slowly move towards mechanisms that are about conflict management, in which you somehow have contained these conflicts. You can assure that they do not spill out of control, but you're not ambitious enough to think that you can resolve them at this point.
Okay, thank you. Asif, I'm not sure if you, let me just say a few things. One was that I think some of the numbers that Asif put out, which James rightly pointed out, I think all three of us dismissed it, even if I didn't actually say it, because it's clear that some of those numbers were just fictional at best. The second thing is, I want to ask Asif if he'd like to respond to anything that James had said or Tilak. And the third is that once you've done that, we've got Alex waiting in the wings to ask a question or jump into the discussion. So Asif, I give you the floor before I hand over to Alex.
Thank you. Very briefly, Michelle, because James has very rightly said he has been sharing my views on that Abrahamic Accord. Just one thing I would like to add: my experiences with Israelis. One of the arguments that they give as good in the relationship between Israel and any other country is that they promise that they would make it easy for the other partners' relationship with the United States. It's a very prominently kept on the table. Okay, so I can see that that attraction there when you have a relationship with Israel, whether it is the United Arab Emirates or any other country of the Gulf, be it even in future Saudi Arabia. So that attraction is there, and there's much weight in that. So Israel could be highly instrumental in forging a meaningful partnership, a deep partnership with the United States. So it should be, or it could be seen in the context of the way we have always maintained at MEI, a traditional role of the United States in the Middle East, where it is not very deeply on the ground, but it is playing a role of a balancer. So I think therein we can see some merit a bit behind this relationship. Thank you.
Thank you. Alex?
Thank you very much for the presentation. Just two quick questions, one to James and one to Asif. First one is, according to the State Department, Chinese and Russian defense company that are going to have any kind of weapon deal with Iran are going to suffer the very full force of the US sanction. And second question is, MOU hint about the possibility of China supporting Iran entering as a full member of the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. If you can comment on that, and thank you very much.
James, please.
Sure. Let me just, okay, I want to just add something to what Asif said earlier about the diplomatic relations between the Gulf and Israel. I think Asif is right that the Washington factor plays a big role in this. But just like you keep these, just like the security aspect of various regional states working together will not solve problems unless it's inclusive. That's true on another level. The Emirati bet is essentially that there's a logic to that bet. The Emirati bet, beyond the benefits of what it may get in Washington, is that it can nudge Israel towards a solution of the Palestinian issue. And the cooperation with the Gulf states could be jeopardized if indeed you got a real escalation on the West Bank. So that's one issue. We also don't know yet, and we'll have to see what US policy will be if Biden comes to office, and what the trade-offs he's going to have to make between the various factions of his party in designing policy, and Palestine could be one of those. In terms of Alex's question, yeah, no, absolutely. At this point, certainly with the Trump administration, any arms deals that are concluded between the Russians and the Chinese, the Americans are probably going to respond forcefully to. But then again, that goes back to, or let me put it differently. Russia and China have different objectives. And I think you've got to understand that. China is in some ways far less inclined to challenge the US fundamentally, at least at this point, unless a far greater deterioration occurs in the bilateral US-China relation than Russia is. Russia is seeking a new world order. China is seeking a rebalancing of the current world order. It doesn't have a fundamental issue with that. And so I think whether or not Russian or Chinese companies start selling arms after October, whatever it is, to Iran is really going to be a function, again, of both Russia and China relations with the United States, far less a function of relations with Iran. Alex, what was your second question? Sorry about that.
That one was for Asif, I think. Yeah. So hang on, before Asif, before you jump in, a few things to the audience. Let's keep the discussion focused on what today's topic is, which is about Iran-China relations and about separating the facts from the fiction. We can always have another session, another day looking at the Abraham Accords, but I think we do have an event coming, so I'd say focus on Iran and China for today, although this has been a very interesting discussion and we've had many ideas that have come in. The second is that after you answer Alex's question, we have two questions, two people who would like to ask a question or comment. The first person is Ravi Vaisya, and the second is Anahita Mortaze. So Mr. Ravi, once Asif has replied to Alex, you can unmute yourself and ask your question or make your comment. Ms. Anahita, I will call you after Mr. Ravi has spoken. Thank you. Thanks, Asif. Continue.
Thank you, Michelle. Very briefly on that arms embargo, the arms flow, potential flow from Russia or China to Iran. We can see that these days US has been acting like more Catholic than the Pope. United Nations Security Council sanctions, UN itself is saying that these are not my babies. But US has been saying, no, these are, UN sanctions, I will be imposed. This is very ironical. So that is the theoretical aspect of it. Practically, how much US will be having leverage to actually do that, we know it does have a lot of things, but it will have a lot of difficulties in imposing that also. So on the ground, that is number one. Number two, on SCO, I think SCO is linked to this discussion because it is one of the arguments that I had given. It is in support to that why is China not very clearly siding with Iran against the rest of the players? So far as it falls in the business domain, it is doing that. But when it goes to the strategic domain, Because see, once once Iran is included as a full member, it cannot be undone, you know, normally speaking. So these strategic decisions China has been keeping on hold for now, and this could be extended, but that would be my answer to Alex's two questions. Thank you.
Michelle, can I add something to what Asif said?
Yeah, yeah.
I think there's another aspect to all of this, which is that if you look at Chinese-Iranian relations since the diplomatic accord, and particularly when Xi Jinping visited Tehran in 2016, the Chinese in very subtle ways have hinted that Iran may be their most important partner in the Middle East. They have never acted on it. But if you go down to 2016, the value of memoranda of understanding that was signed in Tehran was a multitude of the value of memoranda signed in Riyadh on that same trip. So China has been hinting at this for a very long time, but also been hinting that it's not something it's going to act on anytime soon.
Thank you. Mr. Ravi, you have the floor.
India.
Hi,
My
could you
question
identify
was,
yourself?
first of all,
Sorry, could you were on mute, I think, or could you identify where you're from? And
sure. Good afternoon to both the speakers from India. My name is Ravi, and I'm a researcher in the field of the international law and relations. One comment and one question to Mr. Asif, that he somewhere in the while he was commenting, he mentioned that the invention of the shale gas in the US and with respect to the low energy demand and the importance for the US in the Middle East. And if I read the happening in last decade, that first we have a retreat of US from the south, from the Afghanistan, then events happening, and then now Abraham Accord, now and then we have a deal with China. So should we, in a larger picture, read this all happenings as a entry of China in the Middle East and retreat of US from the Middle East as well now?
Should I answer, Michelle?
Yeah.
Okay, Ravi. See, again, the intention between the two countries, I'll tell very briefly that US is still the preeminent power in the Middle East, and China is not in a position to replace it in a manner US has played a role in the Middle East. Now, the discussion or the debate that is mostly happening is not whether China can entirely replace United States, but the part of it that is withdrawn from Middle East by United States, whether China can fill that part, that small part, because China is not intending to replace United States. I mean, that is my answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Anahita Motazed, you have the floor. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I apologize if I haven't.
No, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. It's very great and very good to be in this session, in this actually fruitful session with Asif, Shuja, and also Michael Dorsey. This is Anahita Motazedrat. I am assistant professor in international relations and international politics in Iran in Azad University. Also, I am the vice president of IISA, Iranian International Studies Association. And so this discussion, however, I have lost a part of it, but it was a very good discussion till now. I have, enjoyed this discussion, and also especially the two speakers and the questions, but I have, different parameters about this question, because I'm Iranian, I'm a professor in international relations, I'm a Middle Eastern, person. So all these causes actually brings a lot of question to me. We know that the Iran's foreign policy with the Western countries, actually it has been for about 200 years. Exactly, it has been started from 1828. But with the Asian countries, especially with the East, it has been started from the 1990 decade. So we can actually claim this relationship with the Eastern countries, especially the China, is very new. But according to the different factors that we all know about Iran's political situation, different economic sanctions, and also the Iranian nuclear issue, actually we have been facing a lot of problems here, especially not only in the region, but also in the international level. And it has been actually caused to Iran that adopts a strategy coming to and welcome to the Eastern powers, especially the China, which has just now has the most important thing, that is the economic upper hand. Again, we think in Iran, what I say here, it is our inside and domestic view. We know that China has the upper hand in its relation with Iran. So, but also Iran is important for China because of its economic reasons, especially the energy sector. But I have a question, actually, two questions I have. What do you think about how deep, according to this, the new relation of Iran and China, how deep could be this relation regarding especially to the dramatic and deep political changes in the Middle East? This relation can be, how deep it would be? This is my first question. And another question I have, however, there are different views about the Iran-China relation, especially the Middle East. What do you think that, is it true, because there is a notion about this, economically, the Middle East will go to the China, but from the security point, the Middle East region, they will go to the United States. So we can actually assume any kind of balance between these two great powers. And the main powers actually at the moment in the region. It is very important for me actually to know, and I should mention that we all know that China, however, disagrees with US, but really in the strategic triangle of US, China, Iran relation, China always has had a steady balancing role between the Iran-United States actually conflicts and controversies. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I think this is something both of you could probably answer, but I'm wondering if we would do it this way. Maybe, Asif, you would like to take the first question. James, perhaps the second one, but that doesn't preclude you jumping in, Asif, into the second one to respond, because I'm quite sure you have views as well. But perhaps you could respond to Professor Anahita's first question, then we let James respond to the second, and then you can jump into whatever James says after that. Yeah? Shall we do it that way?
Sure.
Thank you.
Sure, Michelle. And I would like to do it in a way where things are not repeated. And there's a question, of course, in everybody's mind, the distinction that Anahita has actually portrayed, the economic role and the strategic or security role. We have to look into the kinds of naval drills that is going on in Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf with other powers. The patrolling, three different types of patrolling teams are there, for ensuring the oil flow. So far, China's energy import is not impinged because of anything. Of course, we don't see China coming or acting militarily. But it is very natural. If I am sitting somewhere and you cut all the sources of water, what would I do? I would, spread my tent. I'll do something. Okay, it's very natural. So when China is sucked away from all these energy sources, is closed because of the conflict. Of course, China will act. It's not because as I said, and we're just alluding to that it is very important. Middle East for China is as important now as it was for United States in 70s. So we don't have to do a lot of exercise. We just have to read the literature, the American security literature of that time. So we can see that how would China do that? China has, one has to look into the precedent. So thank you. I'll just take up that part. So James, please.
I think that Professor Anahida's questions are interlinked. So how deep relations can go between Iran and China, I think is a function of far greater questions, some of which we don't have the answers to. Sure, potentially Iran is a major energy source for China. But as long as China, by and large, abides by US sanctions, that resource isn't worth very much. And so a lot would depend on whether or not China gets to a point where it no longer cares what the US thinks and what the US may do. I think we're quite a ways away from that. So in a sense, if you're going to use energy as a trump card, it's a fairly worthless card in the short term. More fundamentally, we're not talking about a US withdrawal from the Gulf or from the Middle East. The US is not withdrawing. It's rejiggering its commitments. It's redefining those commitments. There is, whether we like it or not, no military power capable or willing to replace the United States as a security guarantor in the region. So the problem that the Gulf states and China have is how do you compensate for that? How do you compensate for the fact that you have no alternative but a U.S. security infrastructure in which the U.S. plays a key part, but will not be the only part, and in which others have to take responsibilities on. And so that's what I think a lot of what we're talking about, what we're seeing is what we're talking about. With other words, there is that growing understanding in various world capitals that the situation as we had it from the Carter Doctrine on, if you wish, is no longer a sustainable situation. And therefore, it's a questioning of redesigning it, involving others, and what the terms of that would be. And that's where the link to your first question comes. So, with other words, if a future architecture is based on a regional non-aggression agreement, in which the parameters are very clear, then various countries, China included, and keep in mind that you will only get that non-aggression agreement if you've resolved the nuclear issue and all the other issues that the Americans are raising and others, the Gulf are raising, the Israelis are raising. But if you get a non-aggression agreement like that, then there's going to be a lot less restriction on developing relations with Iran. And it's going to be a lot less of a controversial issue.
Thank you.
Thank you,
both of you.
I hope that answered your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions? Asif, James, is there anything that you disagree with each other? I mean, there were many things we had different views about, but is there anything else that we think we might want to actually address in the discussion? You know, I'm not sure, Asif, whether some of the points that James made you would challenge. I think he would welcome a good argument.
Absolutely, absolutely. But having said that, I think, you know, in many ways, I'm not sure that the differences between Asif and me are that fundamental.
I don't think they are.
I think it's much more a question of how you approach this.
Yeah.
And what your lens is.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying anything judgmental with this in many ways, but I think that I'm throwing a wider lens on this.
Agree.
And putting it in a larger context where, where Asif is focusing much more on the more focused elements of this issue. So I'm not sure.
In many ways, the more traditional too. I mean, I would sort of look at how he looked at it. I think I would initially look at it in that way. But you brought up interesting perspectives, which made me think as well, because there's always that game that goes on, you know, and you deal with two great old civilizations that are far more complicated, you know, and have a longer sense of history than many of the rest of us do, you know. Now, I've just realized that there is a question, actually. I think Feng Chin wanted to ask a question. So before I go on, let me give the floor to Feng Chin to ask his question, and then we can continue this discussion or make his point. Yes, Feng Chin, you have the floor.
Hi, great to see both speakers today. I think you both did a very interesting job telling us about this issue. So I have a question for James specifically. You mentioned several times about there being a look at a non-aggression pact, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, you're saying that it would have been between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and that there's some impetus coming from China. So I'm interested on this matter, where in China is the impetus coming from? Is it coming from the state? Is it something that we've heard being talked about by researchers in the press? How much is the Chinese state willing to support diplomatic engagement towards getting such a non-aggression pact? And to the wider question about the regional security architecture, because this is something that the Iranians are also very interested in. We've heard President Rouhani talk about the Hope initiative. So, but there's always been a sort of suspicion between the two sides about, both sides accuse each other of being insincere, right? So I'm wondering, to what extent would China be willing to play that party, a sort of guarantor party to create the groundwork necessary for such a regional security architecture? And I have a separate question as well for Asif. And I think one interesting thing that is relevant to the question is how much, what do Iranians feel domestically about China and this partnership? Now, you've mentioned Ahmadinejad, and yes, so, he's talked about this agreement as being very bad for Iran. But how about the Iranians on the ground, Iranian business people? How do they see it? I know we had incident where the former spokesperson for the health ministry, Dr. Kianush, I believe was his name, and there was an incident where he said something about China and a comment about China with respect to the coronavirus response, and that caused some comment in Iran. And I'm also wondering, because I'm very pleased that we have Professor Anahita here, and of course she's in Iran, and I'm just wondering if she would like to, whether she would give us a perspective from Iran on that issue as well, if she would like to. Thank you so much.
Do you want me to go first, Michelle?
Sure.
Okay. The answer to the question is subjective, if you wish. So, with other words, I have no doubt in my mind that this is where the government of China is moving, even if it's at this point not coming out and saying that. But what you have had is a number of Chinese intellectuals who, with very close connections to the state and various branches of the state, who have been very articulate on this. And their statements have ranged from the Middle East isn't important, and these are not these are not people that you would easily disregard. Describing a decline in economic relations since 2014, describing a situation in which the prospects for volatility in the Middle East and for economic growth have been substantially changed by the economic downturn, the crisis in the energy markets, the pandemic, and raising the question whether it's worth China's investment. And I think the message there was not so much that China was going to abandon the Middle East, but it was a message of saying, you need to get your act together. What does getting your act together mean? That was, in my mind, among other things, came out in an article in a prominent foreign policy magazine in China by at least one of their most prominent Middle East scholars with very close government ties, in which he actually laid out 5 principles for a Chinese engagement in the region. And they were all the, justice and multilateralism and what you would expect. But there was one principle, which I partially can quote, which was that you would maintain or that you would reserve differences while maintaining them. And that was, in my view, that was the formulation. We're looking for conflict management. We're not looking for conflict resolution. We need to maintain. We need to somehow. Retain these differences. Now, one indication that the Saudis took this serious was that in response to these things, you had the first ever, since the 1990s, you haven't had it since, so the first time in 20, 25 years, a vicious attack on China that did not mince words in a Saudi publication. And nothing is published, certainly nothing like this is published in Saudi Arabia without a government nod at the very least. It described China as vultures. It went into the situation in Tibet, in Hong Kong, in Xinjiang. In other words, it was as vicious as it comes. And you've had radio silence since. So I think what you're seeing is, and that's why I was speaking about jockeying, if you wish, or shadow boxing. It's not something you're going to achieve overnight. It's going to be a long, drawn-out process, but you recognize that what is now is not sustainable in the longer term.
Thank you. Asif, I don't know if you want to add to that or challenge some of that? Or
no.
Agree?
No, actually, this question included my country, India. So I think I must, talk about it because and Anahita also has mentioned upper hand. China will have an upper hand. These are important things because when somebody says upper hand, the elephant in the room is India. And I think it's important to take into account here. On the ground in China, in Iran, whenever they talk about relationship with China, they have great anger. If I can portray it in a relationship way, that if a man has to proposes a girl of the same caste, and that girl says no, and the only option that man has is an intercaste marriage, where he has to divulge a lot of things, he has to make a lot of adjustments. So how much anger this man will have for that girl? That is the relationship I can see in Iran. Whenever they have felt that I have to go towards China, they have this anger against India. This is what I have seen. There's a lot of respect for Indians there, a lot of respect for Indian ambassadors there. And China, they know it's very important, very powerful, but upper hand, what we have just heard. So I think this relationship between Iran and China has to be contextualized in relationship between Iran and India. So that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Well, that's probably a discussion for another day, because I think you can't look at Iran, China and not look at Iran, India. It's an old relationship, and it's something that we should really look at and discuss. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry.
Well, I guess we've sort of, yes, Feng Chen.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I noticed that Professor Anita had a camera on. Would she like to say something about the question?
May I talk? May I speak, actually?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you, Michelle. Actually, yes, we have seen each other, Tang Feng, in the previous talking, especially we had on the MEI recently. But I just have one comment. You know, from inside Iran, we think that the academic parts of Iran, we think that the Iran-China relation, especially from the Iranian side, actually has not been conceptualized. And like what Asif said, it has not even been contextualized. So it's very important to see in this relation such a kind of, thinking. So for Iran, China is very new actually in every aspect. Even so in this relation, we have to consider these kinds of, points and parameters here. And I was thinking that also Tang Feng had asking me something that I couldn't hear him. If it is not like this, so I will go. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was a useful comment, actually. And it's always good to get that sort of perspective as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And also both of the speakers. Thank you.
But thank you for adding to the discussion. I think it made it a much more interesting conversation among all of us. So, so I think if we haven't got any more comments or questions, we should end the session because we're close to the hour to end it. I want to thank everyone for joining us. And those of you who have signed up for tomorrow's Middle East 101, please do join us. It will be an interesting session. It's part of our ongoing series. And we welcome all of you. So thank you very much for joining us. Thank you very much, James and Asif, for letting me press gang you into this debate today and this discussion.
Thank you.
It's been an enjoyable session, and I look forward to the next round.
Absolutely.
I'll see you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.